welcome to another powerful conversation with powerful women. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Jacqueline Cripps today. Apologies for being a few minutes late, completely my fault, technical issues, but we're here and I'm very excited to welcome you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Claire. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you for sorting the technical issues out earlier as well.
No problem. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, just to introduce yourself to people.
So I'm a, like to step away from the labels, but I guess in summary, I'm a management consultant, writer and speaker. I focus, I think, very much predominantly around workforce management, helping workplaces understand their teams from a millennial translation point of view. So working with leaders in understanding the needs of millennials, but equally to translating or helping millennials understand the needs of themselves in the workplace, trying to bridge that gap predominantly. So that's my niche expertise area there. Very much a portfolio that's extended from a lot of public service projects over the years, and my writing is very much geared around business publications around workforce management, the niche area around millennials. I've written a couple of self-help books or transformational books. I'm dabbling into the world at the moment of TV writing. So it's quite an eclectic, gorgeous mix that I like to do, which keeps me very busy.
Wow. And so tell me, how did you sort of stumble across millennials as a topic to be interested in?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was only reflecting on this the other day, Claire, and it just kind of feels like I followed the trail of breadcrumbs that kind of life has led to me. So going back probably about 5, 6, 7 years ago, as I reached a point in my life which won't go into because I wrote a book about it. But that was kind of like the point of transformation beginning. And I think from then on in, as part of doing a lot of that self-work on yourself, you start re-examining, areas of you and your life. And there was one particular I guess issue that I was having, around just trying to identify my needs, but workplaces, some management issues. And the more I because I think sometimes in the workplace we struggle going, is it me? Is it the other person? And it kind of got into this whole, I feel really disengaged. I'm working my butt up. I just felt like I was being pulled from pillar to post and not really understanding what was going on. So I started to look a little bit more into the concept of intergenerational conflicts and generational diversity. And for me, it was almost like this penny drop moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, we talk about diversity in the workplace, but when we start looking at cohorts of generations, there's differences. And when I realized that what I was experiencing was just a result of this intergenerational conflict, and it had nothing to do with me personally. It was, there was a boomer and millennial miscommunication between us. So that's all it was. And that's, for me, I felt like I just was it resonated so strongly with me. I'm like, oh my gosh, there needs to be more education and awareness around this. And, fast forward, 6 years later, here we are. And, over that period of time, I've been, involving myself, from experience from the being that person, bringing in my experience, research, working with clients, writing books about it. So I think COVID has also fast-tracked, the real absolute need for workplaces to better understand the future workforce, which are, millennials and soon to be Gen Z as well. So very, very passionate about it, Claire.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's fascinating because, I've been doing a lot of reading recently on transgenerational beliefs and cultures that are passed across generations, and been doing some reflection on my own life and how some of those things come across. And of course, how we are in our personal life is also how we are in our professional life, even if we try to keep a boundary between the two. So I think that's really interesting to look at workplace issues from that perspective, because it kind of helps take away the sensitivity around it, or taking it personally.
Absolutely. And I think, when we do start looking at, from a values-based point of view and, how we've raised up, we have gone from, older generations may have seen that whole work-life balance, you go to work, you go home, but very much for us, and very much coming in with Gen Z, who are also trying to grasp this, what does life look like when you are blending? It is about the integration now, because life, we're not segmenting into components. It's about that integration and holistic. So how can I do it all in a way that's, still represents the authentic self in some parts? So yeah, it's fascinating.
And do you see that sort of like the baby boomer or older generations have more to learn from the millennials, or vice versa, or is it?
It's really interesting. I'd had a millennial colleague reach out to me only a couple of days ago, asking for some advice because of the nature of the workplace and the issue, what I say, boomer thinking. And, in that conversation, because I very much think it's always going to be two sides to the coin. Boomers have so much to share and so much to give and so much advice that they can impart. There's so much knowledge there. Yet at the same time, millennials have so much to offer in exchange, but it's how we communicate that and how we listen to each other and how we can find ways of working around that. So I like to think that they can both really add value to each other. And I do always believe there's a workable solution. It's around better understanding, that why millennials are the way they are, or why the boomers are the way they are. When you take that step back and start looking at, the social, political, environmental, cultural issues, from a generational, in that 20-year windows when they've grown up, like, in that formative environment that's shaped how they are today, you can start getting a much more appreciation. I mean, we're in a world now where things are changing so rapidly. It's hard to kind of keep up. And so 20 years these days, probably feels like 100 years, whereas going back before, it's quite compressed. So needs and wants are very different, and it's just about creating awareness around that, going, okay, so that's okay, and how can we come to this workable solution and help and add value to each other in our relationships?
Yeah.
And
I think I did some training to be a workplace mediator, and part of that was when you have conflicts between people, that underneath all of those sort of behaviors and the impacts are universal needs. And I assume that is exactly the same with millennials and baby boomers. Like the really core level of needs are going to be the same. They're just manifest themselves in slightly different ways.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And then we start looking at the values as well. We value things for different reasons as part of that. So yeah, I think fundamentally we all want the same thing. It's how, as you've said, it's how that's manifested, and how can we then learn the language so that people feel heard and understood in being able to address and get those needs satisfied.
Yeah. It's really, really fascinating. So what are your like top tips that you give to millennials or baby boomers? And I'm sort of just taking the baby boomers as an example, but to help better communicate in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a really, I think first it's always around like the problem identification. I think there is so much, workplaces are complex at the best of times, and there's a plethora of issues, generational diversity and understanding that this intergenerational dynamics is just kind of one piece of the pie, so to speak. So I very much think, when we are looking at how you can better understand millennials, it's firstly just again, coming back to generational, they are a different cohort of people. They've grown up in very different times. Social media and technology have shifted things dramatically for this generation, even more so for Gen Z. When you start thinking about impacts on how that impacts communication, but also soft skills, decision-making, initiative, everything is instant gratification. So there is so much that has shaped and influenced us as a generation, and that then, manifests how we show up in the office and what we expect. So it is about just understanding the nuances, that it's not about entitlement or disrespect. It is really about how we're being conditioned as a generation in society because of, all of this around the outside. But then equally for millennials, and when I was talking to my colleague about this yesterday, it's also really appreciating and respecting that boomers have grown up in also a very different environment, and they have done the work. They have, I'll use the phrase, paid their dues. They've slogged, they've worked, they've climbed that ladder, they've really rolled up their sleeves and done the hard work. And I think we have to respect that, going, and let's not say that what we're doing is hard. It's just how we do it and our work ethic and how we may approach our tasks are different. But I still think that there has to be that respect of going, I hear you, I appreciate you. and I respect you, and it is that, like I said, it's the mutual, it's coming to the common middle ground. And as I was saying to my colleagues, you know, it is about going, well, there has to be a middle point. There's always going to be what you want, is, you know, what you don't want, and then there's a middle ground for all of us, and we're always going to have to make compromises to reach a middle ground in being able to facilitate that harmony and understanding, and in turn build better cultures in workplaces. You know, because as you know, Claire, you know, it's a disconnect. You know, when we are disconnected as, you know, people from our work, it impacts everything, performance, engagement.
Yes.
I mean, there's, like I said before, the issues we have at the moment around recruitment, retention, engagement, performance are huge. So it's about trying to find, you know, the small, you know, I mean, it's a big topic, but it's really quite simple when you break it down and go, okay, so if we start approaching it with a little bit of a different perspective, how do we go about this? And I think that's one of the, I guess, one of the challenges. It's not just about those issues, but about workplaces recognizing that there is this generational fold, that you know, this ball of yarn, I guess, that's kind of infiltrating all the workplaces, that if they don't understand it, they are very much at risk of losing good people, which could be avoided, you know, with some simple conversations.
So where do you see it sort of moving or evolving over the next 10, 20, 30 years? What will the workplace look like then, and how will what will the youth of those days, like the incoming workforce, what will their expectations be? Or is that just like way too big a question?
It's interesting. Once upon a time, I think we'd be able to predict, but I think things are changing so rapidly that it's so hard to predict. And I know there's a lot of research going in the moment around, you know, what the future workplace might look like, because technology has changed anything. But it's also not about what the future workplace is, actually the future skills. So what you know, so you know, universities, for example, governments, education, they have to start thinking differently around what that future workforce is going to look like, and that workplace. So I have no idea. I think fundamentally, though, whatever that looks like, at the very least, it's going to be millennial and Gen Z, you know, led and predominant.
Yes.
So, you know, by 2025, we're going to have 75% of the global workforce millennials and Gen Z consisted of. So, you know, we're already coming up to middle management, if not. So, irrespective of what the landscape looks like, all those future skills, if those workplaces don't understand and kind of accommodate to our workforces, then, you know, it's that whole risk of like burning, and, you know, so it's very much, so that for me is the biggest, what I see is the biggest risk is not understanding, and we are very fast and very quickly coming up into these positions and so I guess the future success of organization is in the hands of millennials. So what are you doing to create that environment that's conducive not just for workplace success, but to let these people shine and do what they do best?
I mean,
it'll be interesting times. I mean, it really is, and gosh knows, like, I mean, you know, when COVID happened, it shifted the landscape again, and I just think the evolution of technology, it just, you know, we don't know. I just think it's becoming just so, you know, crazy with some of these advancements with technology. So I mean, if you think just like on a sort of more personal level, when you know, when I interact with people that are in, say, the baby boomer generation, and they're struggling, I don't understand why I need to do online banking, and it's so much easier when you could just pop into a branch, and all these sort of examples of how technology is for younger people. It's just so easy and just part of the fabric of the way that we live. And if you imagine that when they were in their 20s, the world was just such a different place. But then at the same time, when I'm in my 80s, it's hard to even imagine what another 30, 40 years from now will look like. I mean, it's just incredible. What are we going to be struggling with? Exactly. Like, it already is it now. You know, I mean, I'm at the top end of the millennials, and even sometimes I struggle with technology. I go, oh my gosh, like I don't. But this is the thing. It's like, well, this is like, I'm you know, in my 30s. Like, this is insane. Like even I feel like I'm out of the loop with some of these things coming in. So it's crazy to think that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no,
I think
really
going back to your point, Claire, it is around change. I mean, everything is the world is changing, people are changing all the time, and I think we have to embrace change as the, there's a saying I like to use, it's change is the only constant, because it is.
Yeah.
It's always happening. And I think that if you
Yeah.
resist change, then you will be left behind. I mean, it is inevitable. So it's the path of least resistance. It's try to adopt change and embrace it as best you can. And that also means, your workforces and how that it's shifting, it's different, might not be the preference, but it's just change as the world evolves. Generally, it's just another component of evolution. So
I mean, even on that, like, I think that the older generations, they'll say, "Oh, I'm way too old to change now." And of course, neuroscience has now proven that even in your 90s, that you can rewire your brain to think and do things differently. So even just the concept of change is different for today's younger generations than it is for the outer ones.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, fascinating. So I have to ask, because you mentioned right at the beginning about script writing, are you able to share any more on that? That's very exciting.
It is very exciting. As a I'm such a creative storyteller, and for me, because I like to challenge myself as well. And having written nonfiction and moved into a novel, a couple of years ago, it's how it's just the love of creating. So I did a screenwriting course last year because I wanted to adapt my novel that I'd written to screenplay, and got through that, and then had to park that to write a book. A leadership and management book, which I'm really happy to say is coming out this year. So that will help, workplaces.
Yeah.
But then it just diving into, again, expanding my portfolio. So I'm now working on a TV pilot and series, which, I've got big expectations of where this is going. So I won't share too much, because I'm very much in those developmental phases. But I just think, as a creative, it's like you follow the trail of breadcrumbs, and, I just have such a, appetite for creating new things. There's a thing with the art of storytelling. It's, it's such a, I love it because, we all know what the impact of a story is, but when you can take big issues and put them in a way where it's much easier for people to kind of resonate and connect with and digest. So I like to see the storytelling component as a more subtle way of getting a message across.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting, because I see myself as a creative, but I've never really seen myself as a written creative. I'm getting much more comfortable in that space. But my daughter, she's doing GCSE drama, and just over this last couple of weeks, she's been working on a piece where they have to write their own script, and it turns out that she really enjoys and is inspired by, as you just said, developing these characters and telling a story in a way that makes an impact. I'm like, wow, where does this come from? But it's just like she was just so engaged in this whole process of, well, how can we, what tricks can we use? How can we develop the characters? Like, wow, this is like really amazing.
It is. It's fascinating. There's a lot of work, and I'm about a third way through my pilot script. And I as you said to a friend, I said, I feel like I'm this crazy woman who's just like so involved with her characters at the moment. She's walking around, she's laughing out loud, just like all these like tweaks that she's seeing to the way things are. And I'm like, no, it literally feels like I've got about 5 personalities at the moment. So it's a lot of fun. So I can appreciate your daughter's adventures as well.
Yeah, and hers was something that was based in the Second World War, so she had that was quite interesting for her, doing the sort of historical thing, which was quite good for them as well, to learn what life was like in those days. Definitely. Yeah. So tell me about some of the challenges that you face with, because you're juggling so many different things. How do you manage to keep on top of it?
Oh my gosh, it's sometimes I have those moments where I'm like, I can't even keep up with myself. I'm like, how do I do it? I don't know. I think for me, it's so simple. Like it's so interesting, because I've changed so significantly over the years. I look back at my younger self in her 20s, who was this, big planner, had to plan everything to the nth degree. And I'm like, what's planning? Like, best laid plans. I don't know what I'm doing next week, let alone, in a month's time. But I think some, you're right when you say juggling a lot. I think one of my challenges is, when you are so passionate about what you do, there is a tendency to overcommit or end up in a state of overwhelm when you go, oh gosh, with every best intent of wanting to do it. So because I'm conscious of that, and very much conscious of I'm a very big advocate, and I know you are too, Claire, around self-care.
Yeah.
Making sure your cup is full before, so I have, routines where I make sure that I spend a lot of time in the morning getting myself into that great energetic state, so I'm clear and focused to get into the day ahead. So that's something I won't compromise on. So for me, it's having these practices where you take that time, meditation, yoga, journaling, what have you, that set you up. And it's, for me, it's become like a base. It's one of those, like having my morning coffee. It's so fundamental to being able to manage everything and keep really level-headed. But that said, as I do try to plan as best as I can, but it's also adopting the art of being flexible with that. And having to just, manage. For me, it's managing my own expectations, I think, a lot of the time as well. It really is. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I've noticed, to share a frank story, just even about today, the last couple of days or the last 10 days, I felt like on this really sort of flow where I've been sort of in flow, if you like, and I've powered through getting things done, but without any sort of stress. I've been like really productive. And today I woke up and I did all my morning routine and things, and I'm like, I'm not feeling it today. Particularly this morning. So I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to force it. And I just said, right, I'm just going to really pare back what I do this morning so that I'm ready to enjoy talking to you and a couple of other things that are happening this afternoon. But in the past, I would have just powered through that, and I would have been pushing myself and having that resistance building up inside. And I know now that if I listen to how that feels inside and I go slower, that I know that this afternoon or tomorrow I'm going to be back on form, going at 100 miles an hour, 100% again.
Yeah, I completely resonate with that. And I think that's one thing it's a work in progress, and I've done really well, is the unconditioning from the paradigm of being busy and doing and all that effort. Less is absolutely more. And I think if we can, I really do. So like you is, I've had those moments over the last few weeks myself. I woke up going, oh gosh, I've got this, I don't feel it. But it's giving yourself permission to say, it's okay, I'm going to put that aside. It's it's not life or death. I'm putting myself first. And that's the most important thing to be able to do, because if, you're, as I said, if you're not at your best self, then you can't be, you can't be shining for anybody else. So so I think that's and I don't know if we necessarily do that all that often, or it might just be a constant work in progress around, self-care, self-management, giving yourself permission, taking the foot off the pedal, the less is more approach. It's and
I think we don't realize that we just get so conditioned into, you have to do to achieve. And that if you don't do it, suddenly everything's going to, like, all the plates that you're spinning are all going to fall to the ground. And actually they don't. They have the momentum in the plates, and you can just leave them on their own up there for a bit, and everything will be okay. And I think but it's practice learning that, and having the confidence to work out when you're going to try it. As well, which situations, like, okay, I'll try it on this one, and remembering in the moment that it's okay to try it. It's tough.
It is. It really is.
But it feels so good when you can do it, because you're such nourishment from inside that you okay, now I get it.
And when things still, and when you, I think because I think sometimes we need to see results to believe that it is actually possible to, to do less and still achieve the same thing. And I think there is that, it's almost like you feel a little bit vulnerable about going, oh, I'm just going to try this and take my foot off the pedal. But what happens if? And when you start seeing that it's like the sun still comes up every day, or those things that you're wanting or working towards, they're still coming to fruition, but in a much more joyful and less stressful way, it kind of continues to revalidate that you're putting yourself first, taking care of you, nourishing you, and just that less is more. It does actually work, but it's I said, it's a constant, because we are so conditioned with it. I'll put my hand up and say, yep, I am the doer, who has to constantly remind herself, hang on, just slow up.
And how do you, like, when you're doing something like writing a script or the books that you've written, and you potentially have deadlines that you've got to meet, how do you manage that in those moments? Because when you're being, well, from my perspective, when you're being creative, sometimes you need to put yourself in a completely different environment and be, so that it kind of opens up this creative path.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, over the years, I've been managing those, the consultancy and the writing as kind of, parallel, or trying to integrate them as best. And I've always found that, if you overdo it from, you're serving others, then there isn't, it kind of takes away the creative energy. So what I've done is I just allocate specific days of the week where they're my creative days, and I don't do client work for that. When I have a big project like the novel that I wrote, the book last year, even in some parts the TV series, because I'm aware of how much it takes. I take chunks of time off. So a month, I'll take a month out of client work and go, all right, this month is purely focused on building this out, and that works well for me. As it is now, I'm doing client work, but I take 3 days of my week purely to create, and that means I can be a little bit more generous to myself from a self-care point of view, because that really enhances the creativity. But I have that freedom where it's like I don't have the distraction of having to think anywhere else. I could completely immerse myself into being the creative, because I found, doesn't say it's not possible, but that in and out of the focus of the attention to different things doesn't necessarily work that well for me. So yes, so certainly when I'm creating, I have to do it in blocks. No,
and so much of what you say resonates, and it really sounds like you have this a bit like me, this need to be able to do and to be, to create and to the consulting part as well, this sort of yin and yang of doing and being. And
no, absolutely. And it's I think it's understanding and recognizing that. And I like the whole the yin and the yang thing, because they complement, they balance the balancing game, right? But they also complement each other. So it's it's recognizing that.
That's awesome. So you, I like to ask people what the motto they live by is. One you've already mentioned is less is more. Do you have any others that you?
I don't know if it's so much motto as a just way of life. It's trusting that everything works out for you. I'm a very big believer in law of attraction, universe creating, using energy work. But there's a phrase that I always remember that a friend told me many years ago, and I use it, and it's jump and the net will catch you. And that for me, I just feels like it just. It's like take the risk or jump, go with your heart. You will always be looked at. That net is always going to be there to catch you. So I like that, jump and the net will always catch you.
That's really, when you first said that sentence, when you said jump, kind of felt this sort of like that fear or anxiety of jumping, but then the net will catch you kind of just gives you like
absolutely. And I think if we all look at the big risks we've taken, or those moments where we do face fear and we jump, like everything's always fine, but it's getting through that, it's getting off it, getting to the ledge and then go, all right, I'm just going to throw myself in. That's the hardest thing.
I love that. No, that's great. That's brilliant. So tell me, if people want to find out more about what you do, what are the best ways to get in touch with you?
So I've got a website, JacquelineCripps.com, LinkedIn. I am on social media, Instagram and Facebook. I think you just find me under Jacqueline Cripps. I'm not a big social media girl, I have to say. So it's very much easier through LinkedIn, or just drop me a note through my website, email, and get in touch. So I'm always love meeting new people, and always open to sharing more about myself and kind of what I do. It's the storyteller in me likes to talk. So yes, always welcome a new connection.
I love it. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
No,
and I can't wait to, I have to keep an eye on LinkedIn.
Find
out about your TV series.
See what happens when I'm out to market. So so thank you, Claire. I really appreciate your time and energy today in creating this gorgeous space, and all the work you're doing as a general thing. It's amazing. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye.